With drug cartels, local militia, and government forces fighting for control, the Heartland is slowly turning into a no man's land.
Imagine a world where heavily armed criminal groups battle in the streets over billion-dollar drug empires, where innocent civilians are caught in the crossfire, and where fear and violence have become a way of life. This may sound like something out of a thriller movie, but for the people of Michoacan, Mexico, it's a daily reality. Michoacan, a once peaceful state in the heart of Mexico, has become the front line in a brutal conflict between two of the most powerful drug cartels in the world, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG, and an alliance of rival groups known as the United Cartels. At stake is control over the multi-billion-dollar drug trade that flows through Michoacan's strategic ports, highways, and farmlands. To understand the depths of Michoacan's cartel crisis, we first need to understand the lay of the land. Situated along Mexico's Pacific coast, Michoacan is a place of stunning contrasts. It's a land of lush forests and rugged mountains, of pristine beaches and rolling hills covered in avocado farms. But beneath the surface, Michoacan has long been a coveted prize for drug cartels. Its vast stretches of remote, difficult-to-police territory are ideal for secretive drug labs, illegal logging, and other criminal ventures. And its long-established smuggling routes, both by land and sea, make it a critical transit point for drugs headed north to the U.S. market.
The war in Michoacan dates back to the early 2000s. Dozens of cartel leaders have been killed or captured since then. The cartels splinter and form new groups, and those groups fight each other.
In the early 2000s, Michoacan was home turf for La Familia Michoacana, a brutal but bizarrely cult-like cartel that blended religious ideology with narco-violence. After its top leaders were either killed or captured in the late 2000s, La Familia splintered into warring factions, like the notorious Knights Templar cartel. This was a sign of things to come. A new era of criminal and hyper-violent competition in Michoacan.
Helping to fuel that uptick in violence is the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG.
Enter the CJNG. Founded in 2009, the group has been called the most powerful drug cartel in Mexico and one of the 5 most dangerous criminal organizations in the world by the US DEA. The CJNG saw an opportunity in the chaos of Michoacan's underworld. Starting around 2012, it began moving aggressively into the state, forging alliances with local gangs and swiftly eliminating rivals in a bid to dominate key trafficking hubs. The CJNG's attack set the stage for an all-out cartel war. As CJNG forces fanned out across Michoacan, they clashed with an array of local crime bosses and factions of older cartels. The fighting reached a tipping point in 2019, when several of the CJNG's biggest rivals banded together to form the United Cartels Alliance, with the explicit aim of halting the CJNG's advance. Almost overnight, Michoacan became a war zone, with daily gun battles, escalating homicides, and entire communities caught in the crossfire. From the avocado groves of Uruapan to the key port of Lázaro Cárdenas, the cartel war has touched every corner of the state. The homicide rate has soared to unprecedented highs, with over 2,500 murders in 2020 alone. Mass graves are discovered with horrifying regularity. Once vibrant plazas and markets, like those in the town of Aguililla, now resemble ghost towns, shuttered and scarred by bullet holes. Tens of thousands of civilians have been forcibly displaced, fleeing to other parts of Mexico or seeking asylum in the US. For locals, the psychological toll is unbelievable. A generation is growing up with the daily trauma of shootouts, kidnappings, and forced recruitment by cartel groups. Social bonds are frayed as mistrust and fear infect communities. Economic life in some regions has ground to a halt, and a strong sense of hopelessness has taken root as the government fails to provide even the smallest amount of security and justice.
¿Dónde está el gobierno y los militares? ¿Por qué ellos no ayudan con esta guerra?
Sí ayudan. Sí ayudan, ¿cómo no? Han agarrado muchos Jaliscos aquí también, pero no es suficiente.
At the heart of Michoacan's cartel crisis is the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. In just over a decade, the group has grown from a small regional player to a criminal behemoth, with a presence in 27 of Mexico's 32 states and operations in almost 50 countries worldwide. With an estimated 5,000 heavily armed members, the CJNG now rivals or even surpasses the power of infamous crime syndicates like the Sinaloa Cartel.
The CJNG leader is known as El Mencho. In the past few years, his cartel has grown from this ragtag group of gunmen in pickup trucks into this powerful paramilitary force, with high-powered weapons and armored vehicles.
The mastermind behind the CJNG's rise is Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, El Mencho. Born into poverty in the rural highlands of Michoacan, El Mencho began his underworld career as a foot soldier for the Milenio Cartel in the 1990s. He rose quickly through the ranks, gaining a reputation for his ruthless ambition. When the Milenio Cartel splintered in 2009, El Mencho seized the moment to forge his own criminal brand, and the CJNG was born.
Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, CJNG, is the single criminal organization most responsible for these deaths on both sides of the border.
The Jalisco New Generation Cartel took the fight to the next level, shooting down a military helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade.
Under El Mencho's leadership, the CJNG has become known for its sheer brutality. Mass executions, public hangings, and the use of social media to broadcast acts of torture are all hallmarks of the cartel's terror tactics. In 2011, El Mencho made global headlines when he ordered the dumping of 35 bodies on a busy street in the city of Veracruz, a gruesome display meant to intimidate rivals and civilians alike. It's this ruthlessness, combined with the CJNG's paramilitary-style training and heavy weaponry, that has allowed the group to overpower both competitors and Mexican security forces in its relentless push for territory.
And in July, footage emerged of that CJNG convoy. These gunmen call themselves the Elite Group and pledge allegiance to El Mencho. In both the convoy and the Mexico City attack, the cartel's firepower was on display. They're armed with assault rifles with grenade launchers attached to the barrel, heavy machine guns, and also this gun. This is a .50 caliber sniper rifle. It's a powerful weapon that the CJNG loves to show off.
But brutality is only one part of El Mencho's criminal toolkit. The CJNG has also proven remarkably adaptable and sophisticated in its business operations. The group has diversified far beyond drug trafficking, delving into extortion, kidnapping, oil theft, illegal mining, and even the production of bootleg alcohol. It runs a complex money laundering network through front companies around the world. Michoacan is crucial to the CJNG's broader strategy of becoming a truly national cartel. With the state's ample drug production infrastructure, strategic ports, and proximity to key trafficking routes, controlling Michoacan would give the CJNG an invaluable launchpad for expanding its operations across Mexico and beyond. This is why, since 2012, the cartel has focused so much blood and terror on the state, steadily chipping away at rivals and buying off local officials in a bid for dominance. The CJNG's rise in Michoacan has been as swift as it is terrifying. In Aguililla, a once sleepy farming town, the cartel views as a key stronghold. The group has become the law, levying taxes, enforcing curfews, and even controlling the flow of food and medical supplies. Residents describe a constant climate of fear, with gunmen patrolling the streets and public executions becoming a regular occurrence.
The reality is that the four letters, as they're called here, are brutal, ruthless. They've killed police and disappeared civilians across the country. And now they're invading Michoacan.
For Michoacan, the CJNG represents a new kind of criminal threat, one that combines the raw firepower of an insurgency with the economic clout and global reach of a transnational corporation. And with El Mencho still at large, and the Mexican government struggling to contain the cartel's growth, there's no end in sight to its bloody quest for power.
The United Cartels claim to be an autodefensive, a bunch of farmers who have formed a militia to protect their villages.
The only thing standing up to the CJNG, the United Cartels. Formed in 2019, the United Cartels are less a unified criminal organization than a loosely knit alliance of civilians, vigilantes, and government authorities, as well as some of the CJNG's biggest rivals. The backbone of the United Cartels is made up of remnants of once mighty crime syndicates that have seen their power chipped away by authorities and the CJNG alike. There's the Sinaloa Cartel, the one-time empire of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, looking to reassert its dominance after El Chapo's arrest and extradition to the US. There's the Knights Templar Cartel, a mock religious crime group that once held sway over much of Michoacan before being pushed to the margins. And there's the Santa Rosa de Lima Cartel, a major player in the state's profitable oil theft racket. Alongside these factions are an array of local gangs and crime bosses, each with their own part of Michoacan's criminal action. There's Los Viagras, a powerful group with deep ties to Michoacan's avocado trade. There's the Blancos de Troya, a remnant of the Familia Michoacana cartel that once dominated the state. And there are the Carteles Unidos, or United Cartels, a patchwork of smaller groups that first banded together in common cause against the CJNG.
The Jalisco cartel's invasion made the smaller groups join forces. Turf wars like this are playing out across Mexico, causing record murders. The Jalisco cartel has been blamed for fueling that violence, and the United Cartels claim Michoacan is better off under their control.
When the alliance first emerged in 2019, it billed itself as a kind of guardian for Michoacan, a counterweight to the scourge of CJNG violence and overreach. In a series of public statements, the United Cartels claimed to be fighting for the people against the invasion of El Mencho's forces.
But now those former enemies have come together under the banner of United Cartels to fight another, more powerful force invading from the state next door, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. Its leader, Nemesio Ceguera, alias El Mencho, is from the Aguililla municipality himself. He wants his hometown and state badly.
Behind the story, of course, was a raw struggle for power. The United Cartels were less interested in protecting Michoacan than in defending their own criminal territory from CJNG incursion. And in practice, the group's formation welcomed in a vicious new phase of cartel conflict in the state as the United Cartels squared off against the CJNG in a series of bloody territorial battles. The heart of the fighting has been Michoacan's Tierra Caliente region, a stretch of rural townships and key drug production zones in the south of the state. Daily conflicts between CJNG and United Cartels fighters have become the norm, with civilians often caught in the crossfire. Both sides have been accused of terrible atrocities, from mass executions to the use of IEDs and car bombs in populated areas.
These guys have makeshift tanks known as monsters, and they strap explosives to drones to use as bombs.
To fuel its war effort, the United Cartels has increasingly resorted to forcible recruitment in the communities under its influence. There have been widespread reports of the group forcing local men and boys into its ranks, threatening families with violence if they refuse to join. The result has been a kind of cartel draft in some areas, causing deep trauma and social divisions as Michoacan's youth are drawn into the cycle of gang violence.
Le puedo decir el dueño de esta casa, lo armaron a la fuerza. Oiga, pero pues nosotros no somos de problemas, aquí nos vale madre. Van a pelear por el patrón. Entonces, llegan las camionetas, incluso llegó un monstruo de ellos, se estacionó enfrente, abren la puerta y se meten. Sacan toda la familia y la hincan aquí.
How many people were fighting here?
Aquí ellos tenían, quizás, no lo sé, pero quizás aquí tenían unos 20 pistoleros. A lo mejor 2 aquí, 2 allá, pero tienen que estar rolando, ¿verdad?
Despite its fighting words, the United Cartels have struggled to make significant headway against the CJNG. The group has managed to beat back CJNG advances in some areas and has been linked to a few high-profile narco-mantas, public displays of executed CJNG members. But it remains very much the underdog in terms of sheer firepower and resources. The alliance has also been troubled by the competing agendas and long-standing rivalries among its members. In 2020, for example, infighting between factions of the Sinaloa cartel and the local Blancos de Troya gang boiled over into a series of mindless killings, undermining the United Cartels from within. This kind of internal friction has been an ongoing issue for the group and a reminder of the limits of honor among thieves in Mexico's fractious underworld. Still, the United Cartels remain a disruptive force in Michoacan's cartel landscape. Even as the alliance struggles to contain the CJNG's expansion, it has managed to draw the larger cartel into a kind of bloody stalemate, a grinding war of weakening that has made Michoacan one of the deadliest battlegrounds in Mexico's wider drug conflict. And for the thousands of residents caught in the middle, that has meant a daily life defined by terror.
Pues es feo porque antes era un pueblo muy tranquilo, muy libre. Y ahorita no podemos dejar a los niños porque es el miedo a estar pensando, a estar atentos, a escuchar ruidos porque en cualquier momento pueden tronar balas.
To grasp the true impact of Michoacan's cartel crisis, you have to look beyond the blood-soaked spectacle to the ordinary people trying to survive the violence.
Aquí no hay cártel bueno. Hoy Cárteles Unidos se ha quedado porque cuenta con el apoyo del ejército, cuenta con el apoyo de la Guardia Nacional. No estoy diciendo que El otro era, bueno, no, ninguno. El gobierno no puede apoyar a un delincuente. Que vaya y limpie, saque a los dos.
Because for the residents of Michoacan, the conflict between the CJNG and the United Cartels isn't some distant, abstract threat. It's an ingrained daily reality, a deadly storm of horror and chaos that has affected every part of life. In towns like Aguililla and Cualcomán, the war has created a kind of living hell, a nightmarish opposite of the social order where even the most normal activities are filled with danger. Simple acts like going to the market, attending school or church, or visiting a neighbor have become potentially deadly as civilians risk being caught in the crossfire of daily shootouts between cartels. Those who can afford to have fled the region entirely.
Hoy se ha ido mucha gente que producía se ha ido.
Locals told us that thousands of people have already left, slipping past the siege and away. In the buildings, we saw the scars of the battle between United Cartels still here and the advancing Jalisco New Generation forces.
For those who remain, life under cartel rule is a constant maze of impossible choices. Many residents speak of being forced to pay protection taxes to the cartels or facing violent retaliation. Businesses are routinely shaken down. Those who resist the cartel's demands often simply vanish, victims of sprawling kidnap and disappearance that has left a generation of Michoacan families in pieces. The disappeared, the hundreds, perhaps thousands of Michoacan residents who have vanished into the cartel underworld. Many are young men forced into service as cartel soldiers, never to be seen again. Others are victims of targeted kidnappings, seized for ransom or to settle scores in the endless cycle of narco vendettas. Still, others simply go missing, their fate lost. For the families of the disappeared, the pain is uniquely cruel, a wound that never closes as they grapple with the agony of not knowing if their loved ones are alive or dead. Many have formed collectives, banding together to pressure the authorities for answers and to search for clandestine graves. But in a system where impunity reigns, their cries for justice routinely go unanswered.
Their grandfather had a burst stomach ulcer on the first day of the blockade. They couldn't get him through to the hospital on the other side. He died.
Against this grim backdrop, there are still glimmers of resilience and courage. In the face of unimaginable threats, a brave cadre of journalists and activists continue to document the cartel's abuses, often at great personal risk. Community leaders organize protests and vigils, stubbornly asserting their right to live free of violence. And in the shelters and safe houses dotting the region, the displaced and traumatized begin the long, slow work of stitching their lives back together. But the overall picture remains bleak. For too many in Michoacan, the promise of a life beyond conflict seems like a distant dream, as remote as the days before the cartel wars began. And as the world's attention drifts elsewhere, they are left to navigate a hellish reality of violence and loss.
Ruthless narco armies, rogue vigilantes, helpless or corrupt politicians, and daily tragedies. It's a bleak panorama. For many people, it's made living here impossible.
The story of Michoacan is, on one level, a very specific tale of a particular time and place, a brutal snapshot of Mexico's underworld at a moment of turmoil. But it is also, in many ways, a creation of the global toll of the drug war and a strong reminder of the far-reaching human costs of the trade in illicit narcotics. While the details may differ, the core drivers of Michoacan's crisis are depressingly familiar. On one side of the equation is the insatiable appetite for drugs in the US and Europe, a multi-billion-dollar market that has become the lifeblood of groups like CJNG. On the other is a toxic mix of poverty, inequality, and institutional weakness in Mexico, creating a breeding ground for criminal organizations that thrive in the absence of legitimate opportunities. Caught in the middle are the ordinary citizens of Michoacan and countless communities like it around the world. The price in blood, in shattered lives, and in the slow destruction of the social bonds that make organized life possible.
Espero que Michoacán en 15 años se encuentre liberado de todo esto. Yo quisiera en 15 años poder venir y no tener que portar una arma, poder venir con mi familia. Tengo 4 hijos que no los tengo aquí, ¿verdad? En 15 años quisiera poder venir con ellos y andar por estos lugares sin necesidad de traer gente armada conmigo ni yo portar un arma tampoco. Y sabemos que en esto andamos y si morimos en esto, pues sabemos que lo hacemos por algo que vale la pena. La guerra, usted sabe que son puras batallas, la guerra nunca se acaba.
So what is to be done? There are no easy answers, but one thing is clear. Any meaningful solution must start with a fundamental rethinking of the drug war idea. For half a century, the international community has poured trillions of dollars into a militarized approach to narcotics that has failed by every aspect. It has neither slowed the flow of drugs nor brought the cartels to a stop. Instead, it has created a large, imprisoned state, fueled cycles of violence, and empowered criminal groups. In the end, the story of Michoacán is not just a Mexican story, it is a human story, a tale of what happens when greed and indifference are allowed to overcome compassion and the collective good. And it is recognizable across all nations that suffer from unstable societies that are ruled by criminal activities.